Mornings began early in New York. The city always awoke before the sun, and so did Margaret Clark. The faint hum of traffic from the avenue below drifted through the slightly open window. The first golden threads of light crawled across her bedroom wall, touching the framed diploma that read, New York University, Marketing and Communications. Margaret sat up in bed, staring at the skyline she had once dreamed about as a college student. Manhattan's skyscrapers stood like monuments to ambition, unyielding, sharp, and glowing with promise. Every morning, she told herself the same thing, you've made it, Maggie, you're here. But lately, even success felt heavy. Monday again, she murmured, rubbing her temples. Her alarm went off a moment later, right on cue. In the small but elegant kitchen of her Manhattan apartment, the coffee machine whirred to life. The rich aroma filled the air, but before she could take her first sip, her phone buzzed. Message from Mom. Maggie. Brittany's rent is due soon, and my refrigerator broke down. I need to buy a new one. Could you wire the money by the end of the week? We love you. Margaret stared at the screen, unreadable for a moment. Then, she placed the phone face down on the counter and took a long, slow sip of coffee. The bitterness tasted familiar. It had been 5 years since she started financially supporting her mother, Carol, and younger sister, Brittany. At first, it was temporary, or so she had told herself. After her father remarried and moved across the country, Margaret felt it was her duty to help her mother and sister get back on their feet. But the months became years, and the temporary help became their lifestyle. Margaret paid their rent, their utilities, their vacations, and even Brittany's emergencies, which often turned out to be designer shoes or spa packages. Meanwhile, her own dreams, like starting Margaret Clark Consulting, her marketing agency, stayed in a dusty folder on her desktop. Just a few more years, she often thought, once they're stable, I'll focus on me. But that few more always stretched a little further. Chapter 2, The Perfect Daughter. The subway rattled beneath Manhattan's surface as Margaret scrolled through her digital calendar. Meetings, calls, presentations, her day was packed from sunrise to sunset. Today was especially critical, a campaign pitch for Bella Beauty, one of the agency's biggest clients. She arrived at Lewis Clark Advertising Agency at precisely 8:45 a.m. The glass doors reflected her composed image, sleek blazer, subtle heels, and a calm smile that hid exhaustion. Morning, Margaret, called her assistant Jessica. Morning, she replied, walking briskly to her office. Inside, she dropped her bag, powered on her laptop, and mentally prepared for the chaos ahead. 10 minutes later, CEO Jennifer Ross entered, holding a stack of papers. Margaret, Jennifer said firmly, this presentation won't do. It's solid, but not spectacular. We need more emotional impact. Can you rework it by tomorrow? Margaret blinked. Tomorrow? Jennifer gave an apologetic shrug. I know it's short notice, but you're the best we've got. Margaret smiled politely. Of course, Jennifer, I'll handle it. But inside, her heart sank. She had promised dinner with her family tonight, and after last week's cancellation, her mother had made her guilt clear. That evening, Margaret found herself running late again. By the time she reached Ristorante Bellini, she was an hour behind. Her mother, Carol, looked radiant in a pearl necklace. Finally, she said, waving her hand dismissively, we ordered for you. Sit, sit. Brittany, 27, blonde, effortlessly stylish, was showing her mother pictures on her phone. Maggie, you have to see this new bag I found. Emerald green. Jason says it's a perfect match for Hawaii. Hawaii? Margaret repeated faintly. Brittany beamed. You said you'd sent us for Mom's birthday. I'm already planning the outfits. Margaret forced a smile. Right, the trip. Carol took a sip of her wine. You work so hard. Sweetheart, you deserve a vacation too. But if you can't come, at least let us go relax for you. The irony wasn't lost on Margaret. They were relaxing for her, with her money. Still, she nodded. Sure, Mom. During dinner, Carol and Brittany dominated the conversation, gossiping about friends, fashion, and dates. When Margaret mentioned her stressful project, they offered only brief nods before changing the subject. As usual, when the bill came, Both looked away. Margaret paid with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks, Maggie," Carol said, kissing her cheek. "Don't forget about the refrigerator." "I won't," Margaret replied softly. Chapter 3. Cracks in the Glass. Back home, Margaret kicked off her heels, tied her hair back, and opened her laptop. The city outside sparkled with nightlife, but her apartment was silent except for the tapping of keys. She revised the Bella Beauty presentation until nearly midnight, then opened her banking app. A few clicks later, $500 was transferred to her mother for the refrigerator, and another $1,800 to cover Brittany's rent. She stared at her account balance. It was shrinking faster than she could replenish it. "Someday," she whispered to herself, "someday, I'll build my own company." Her phone buzzed again, a social media notification. She ignored it and closed her eyes. Just sleep. Tomorrow's another big day. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. The next morning, the office was alive with energy. The Bella Beauty presentation could make or break Margaret's career. "Everyone, final checks," she called, her voice firm despite the exhaustion. "We present in 2 hours." Jessica handed her a coffee. "You've got this. The deck looks incredible." Margaret smiled weakly. "Thank you, Jess. I just hope." Her phone vibrated. A message from Brittany. "Emergency. Call me right away." Margaret frowned. She typed back, "I'll call later. Big presentation today." Seconds later, another message appeared. "Maggie, please, it's serious." She ignored it. Not now, she thought. Not today. Minutes before the presentation, she went to the restroom to collect herself. Her reflection showed dark circles hidden under concealer. A woman who looked polished but bone-tired. She glanced at her phone again. 10 unread messages from Brittany. "Why aren't you answering? We're family. I need $2,000 by tomorrow, it's urgent. Please, Maggie." Margaret sighed. Her temples throbbed. 2,000 again? She scrolled through notifications, then froze. Brittany is live on Instagram. Something about the timing made her uneasy. She tapped it open. The image appeared instantly, Brittany and Carol, lounging on the expensive white sofa Margaret had gifted them. A wine bottle sat between them. Carol laughed. "So, how much did you tell her this time?" 2,000. Brittany giggled, though honestly, $11,000 would be better. Maybe I'll add a spa trip to the excuse. Carol smirked. "Good girl. She'll send it without question. She always does." Brittany rolled her eyes playfully. "Maggie's so clueless. She's like, the ultimate ATM. Let's go to Hawaii again, first class this time." They both burst out laughing. For a moment, Margaret couldn't breathe. Her phone trembled in her hand. The sound of their laughter echoed through her mind like static. The ultimate ATM. That's what they saw when they looked at her, not a sister, not a daughter, a source of money. Then Brittany's voice wavered. "Wait, was this streaming live?" The screen went black. Margaret stood there for a long time. Her heart raced, her throat tight. "They used me. They never loved me, only what I could give." Jessica knocked gently on the door. "Margaret, we're ready." Margaret wiped her tears, straightened her blazer, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her reflection stared back, a woman who was done being blind. She picked up her phone, opened her banking app, and removed all automatic transfers to Carol and Brittany. Then, without hesitation, she blocked their contacts. Her hand stopped shaking. She inhaled deeply and whispered, "No more." When she walked back into the conference room, she was composed again. Her heart was raw, her eyes red, but her voice steady. "Good morning, everyone," she said, opening her laptop. "Let's begin." And for the first time in years, she worked only for herself. The presentation ended in thunderous applause. The client's executives were smiling, shaking hands with the team, and Margaret could finally breathe. Her proposal had not only impressed them, it sealed a $1 million contract for Lewis Clark Advertising. "You did it, Margaret," one of her colleagues said, beaming. "You carried this campaign on your back." The team cheered, high-fived, and began planning an impromptu celebration at a downtown bar. Someone popped open a bottle of champagne from the break room. Glasses clinked. Laughter filled the office. But Margaret just smiled faintly. "I'm going to leave a bit early today," she said softly, her voice nearly drowned out by the noise. "Thank you all. Really." No one questioned her. She'd earned the right to rest. As soon as the elevator doors closed, her composure began to crumble. The moment she reached her apartment, Margaret dropped her handbag, kicked off her heels, and fell onto her bed. The silence of the room felt deafening. The weight of the last 24 hours, the betrayal, the humiliation, the realization that her family had mocked her, came crashing down all at once. For years, she had convinced herself that love was sacrifice, that family meant giving without question. But the truth was harsher. She had been feeding a bottomless pit of greed and indifference. Her sobs filled the dark apartment. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why did you use me like this? Why wasn't I enough without the money?" She cried until her throat burned and her chest ached. When she finally fell asleep, it was a restless, tear-stained slumber. The next morning, the sun filtered weakly through the blinds. Her eyes were swollen, her body heavy, but her mind, strangely, was clear. Margaret stood before the mirror, studying her reflection. "I look exhausted," she murmured, but there was something new in her expression, a quiet strength she hadn't seen before. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages. "Mom, Maggie, why aren't you answering? We didn't mean it that way. Brittany, I'm sorry, okay? But I need to talk to you. It's urgent." Margaret read every word. Then she locked her screen and placed the phone face down on the counter. Instead, she opened her laptop. There, in a folder buried deep within her documents, was a file titled Margaret Clark Consulting, Draft Plan. Her heart beat faster as she opened it. Charts, notes, client lists, and sketches of a dream she had postponed for 5 long years stared back at her. She whispered to herself, "Enough. It's time to live my own life." That afternoon, she knocked on her boss's office door. "Come in," said Jennifer Ross, the CEO, looking up from her laptop. Margaret entered, composed and steady. "Jennifer, I've been thinking about this for a long time," she began. "I'd like to resign. I'm starting my own consulting company." Jennifer blinked in surprise. "Really? Margaret, are you sure? You're one of our best." "I'm sure," Margaret said, her tone calm but resolute. For a moment, Jennifer studied her and then smiled knowingly. "You've got what it takes. I'll support you. In fact, I'll introduce you to some clients. Just promise me you'll rest once in a while." Margaret laughed softly, the first genuine laugh in days. "I'll try." As she stepped out of the office for the last time, a wave of liberation washed over her. The city outside looked brighter, as though New York itself had been waiting for her to take this step. The following weeks were a blur of motion. She moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, smaller, simpler, but finally hers. She sold old clothes, canceled unnecessary subscriptions, and redirected every dollar toward launching Margaret Clark Consulting. The absence of her mother's and sister's messages was a relief, though the silence felt strange. When they did reach out, endless calls, pleading emails, dramatic voicemails, Margaret didn't answer. Instead, she made an appointment with Dr. Reed, a counselor recommended by a friend. "They were using you, Dr. Reed said gently after hearing everything, "but you also accepted that role." Margaret frowned. "What do you mean?" "Your love for them became transactional, not because you wanted it that way, but because you tied their affection to your support. You gave money to feel valued, and they gave attention only when they needed more. It's a cycle of dependency, one that only you can break." The truth stung, but it was freeing, too. A month later, Margaret unlocked the door to a co-working office in Brooklyn, her first official workspace. A small desk, a second-hand laptop, a whiteboard. That was all. "This is the real beginning," she said quietly. The early days were grueling, clients were scarce, and rejection emails piled up, but she didn't falter. She attended networking events, wrote proposals at midnight, and pitched ideas to anyone willing to listen. And then, a breakthrough. A young entrepreneur named Sophia from Bloom Organics loved her approach. "You're exactly what we need," Sophia said during their meeting. "Someone who believes in ideas, not just numbers." When the contract was signed, Margaret opened a small bottle of champagne in her apartment that night. She toasted silently to new beginnings. Her phone buzzed again. Brittany. She looked at the screen, then put it face down without answering. I'm not that woman anymore, she said aloud. By the third month, Margaret Clark Consulting had its first major success. Bloom Organics campaign went viral, and new clients began reaching out. Margaret hired her first assistant. Her confidence grew, not from wealth, but from independence. Then one afternoon, her friend Sarah called. Maggie, it's about your mom and Brittany, Sarah said hesitantly. Margaret's stomach tightened. What about them? They haven't paid rent in 2 months. The landlord's threatening eviction. Your mom's working 2 part-time jobs, and Brittany's waitressing now. They're trying. Margaret was silent for a long moment. They're adults. They'll figure it out. I thought you should know, Sarah said softly. They're planning to visit your office today. Margaret's pulse quickened. She glanced at the clock. 3 p.m. The knock came exactly 10 minutes later. When the door opened, her mother and sister looked nothing like before. Carol's hair was unkempt, her nails bare. Brittany wore a simple sweater and jeans, her eyes puffy from crying. Maggie, Carol said, her voice trembling, we finally found you. What do you want? Margaret asked, keeping her tone even. Why did you cut us off? Brittany pleaded, we're struggling. I'm sure you are, Margaret replied coldly. It's hard when your ATM stops working. Both women froze. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about, Margaret continued. I saw your live stream. Brittany's face crumpled. It was a joke. A joke? Margaret's voice rose. You laughed about how I'd never notice, how I'd keep paying for your luxuries while you mocked me. Was any of it ever real? Carol broke down in tears. We were wrong. Please, Maggie, we're sorry. Margaret's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. You didn't just take my money, you took my trust. And trust doesn't come back easily. Brittany stepped forward. We can't pay rent. We have nowhere to go. Can't you help us this one last time? Margaret looked out the window. The skyline gleamed beyond the glass, a reflection of her new life. No, she said quietly. You have to live by your own strength now, like I did. Silence filled the room. I don't hate you, she added softly, but I won't be used again. Her mother's tears fell silently, but Margaret didn't waver. If you want to rebuild something real, start by rebuilding yourselves. They left quietly. As Margaret watched them walk away from the window, she felt sadness and peace intertwine. Maybe this was what real love looked like, not endless sacrifice, but letting go. 1 year later, the event hall in Manhattan shimmered with lights and laughter. It was the 1-year anniversary of Margaret Clark Consulting. Clients, colleagues, and friends gathered to celebrate her success. To Margaret, Sophia declared, raising a glass, for her strength, her creativity, and her unstoppable spirit. Cheers erupted, and glasses clinked. Margaret smiled, genuinely, radiantly. The past year had been hard, but beautiful. Bloom Organics had doubled its sales, her firm had grown to a team of 5, and she'd even won an Emerging Marketing Leader award. That night, when she returned home to her warm, neatly decorated apartment, she found an envelope on her table, a Christmas card. Her name was written in familiar handwriting. Margaret sat down, hesitated, then opened it. Dear Maggie, when you left, we were angry, but your absence taught us responsibility. I'm now working full-time at an insurance office. Brittany works at a hotel front desk. We share rent, pay bills, and for the first time, we're surviving on our own. We're deeply sorry for everything, not for the money, but for how we treated you. If you're willing, could we meet for Christmas? Just to talk. With love. Mom and Brittany. Margaret exhaled slowly, tears welling in her eyes, not from pain this time, but from something softer. A week later, she met them at a small cafe near Central Park. They looked older, humbler, more human. Hi, Margaret said quietly. Hi, Carol whispered, her voice trembling. The 3 of them sat together, awkward at first, then gradually easing into conversation. They talked about work, life, and how each of them was learning, finally, what it meant to stand on their own feet. When Brittany smiled shyly and said, "We've changed, Maggie," Margaret believed her. "I'm not an ATM anymore," she said gently. "I'm just me, and I deserve respect." Carol nodded, tears in her eyes. "And you'll have it, always." Snow began to fall outside the cafe window, silent, delicate, forgiving. Margaret looked out, smiling faintly. For the first time in years, she felt whole. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was real, and it was hers. Would you like me to make the next segment, 5 years later, Conti?